Welcome to our chapter on social psychology. In this particular chapter, we're going to take a look at interacting with other individuals, how that influences our personality and behavior, as well as how we influence others around us. Topics that we're going to take a look at are social thinking, and looking at basically attributing behavior of people to either their personalities, or what we may refer to as disposition, or to the situation. When something happens, was it because of this person's personality, or was it because of the situation that they're in? We'll take a look at attitudes and actions, and what we're really going to look at is the people's behavior coincide with their attitudes. Now, how many times do we see people espouse one attitude and then do something very different? In the social influence, we're going to take a look at the power of conformity, and we're going to take a look at a very famous study by Zimbardo, his infamous prison study, where he shows that this notion of conformity. And then we're going to take a look at obedience, and we're going to come in contact with Stanley Milgram in a very famous study he did on basically administering electrical shock to people, and where the people more or less blindly, obediently follow an individual's request to administer shocks, even when they get up to being lethal. Then we're going to look at group influence, and we're going to look at the power of the individual. We'll finish up with talking about social relations and spend some time taking a look at a very important topic of prejudice, and basically how it's formed, how it comes about, and how it influences us. We'll look at aggression, attraction, altruism, and conflict and peacemaking in the third part. Okay. When we talk about social psychology, we talk about is interacting with others. And Herman Melville, many years ago, the author of Moby Dick, I think, hit it on the head, is we cannot live for ourselves alone. And we're not islands unto ourselves. It's not commonplace for humans to go off, and be isolated in some corner of the world, hiding in a cave, living out in a remote cabin of the woods, and never desiring to come in contact with other people. The exact opposite, as our basic human nature is to seek out others. We're gregarious by nature, that we desire to have others in our lives. And so the topic of social psychology then really becomes very important or critical in taking a look at just how that interaction influences us and shapes our lives. So in social psychology then, what we're looking at is basically scientifically studying how we think about, influence, and relate to one another. We're going to start off then in part one here, looking at social thinking and the topic of attribution theory. When we talk about social thinking, it's like when we watch other people perform behaviors, oftentimes we think about, well, why did they do that? Well, what are the attributions that we ascribe to that situation? Let's say that somebody is absent, as in the example number one up here. And does their absenteeism signify illness? Are they lazy? Or is it a stressful work atmosphere, in the sense that, they're just laying out, they're lazy, they really don't want to work, they'll find any excuse to lay out? Or is it that maybe, it's not that they're lazy, they're a hard worker, but the work is so stressful right now, I can understand maybe where they wouldn't want to come in. And, just for their own personal health, that they need a break. And I can understand where maybe they wouldn't show up. And the second one, as we think about 9/11, and most of us still sometimes scratch our head, is how could people do that? How could they take that many innocent lives? And, what were they thinking? And so here, it's kind of like, were they a bunch of crazed, evil people, or are they ordinary people basically corrupted by life events? Were they caught up in the mass hysteria about the great Satan, and how the great Satan was going to destroy their way of living, and looked at us as very evil, and therefore got caught up in it? Didn't have anything to do with them necessarily being, bad people, or, maybe evil people, but being caught up. And, probably, what you have to do is probably come down to, person to person to person to examine what their real motivations were to know what we attributed to. Social thinking, then, involves thinking about others, especially when they engage in doing things that are unexpected. That's where our curiosity is really picked. When somebody does something and we expect them to do that, we generally don't ask the question, gee, why did they do it? It's when they do something that is unexpected that raises those questions of attribution. Okay? Attribution theory was developed by Fritz Heider back in 1958, and what he suggested is that we have a tendency to give casual explanations for someone's behavior, and that we often credit either the situation or the person's disposition. And we'll take a look at these two terms here. The teacher, for example, may wonder whether a child's hostility reflects an aggressive personality, which is the dispositional attribution, or is it a reaction to stress or abuse, which is a situational attribution? So let's take a look at a little bit more a specific situation. Dispositions are enduring traits. So if Joe, our little boy over here, kind of peeking out around the corner very shyly, is quiet, shy, and introverted, is he likely to be like that in all situations or a number of situations? Or is he maybe just like this at school? And that's a real good question. So, if it's dispositional, meaning that it reflects his personality, then we would presume that his shyness and his quietness would carry across all situations. However, it's situational. Maybe for some reason at school he just feels very shy. Maybe it's because a lot of other people are around and he's feeling the pressure of evaluation by all these people, and that causes him to withdraw in. Then it would be, in fact, situational. So, is it his personality or is it not? Okay, so in taking a look at the young boy situation, we can have an error effect come in here that we refer to as the fundamental attribution error. And the fundamental attribution error is a tendency to overestimate the impact of personal disposition, or one's personality, and underestimate the impact of the situation or the environment that the individual is in analyzing the behaviors of others. And this is what we refer to then as the fundamental attribution error. So, back to Joey. Here we see Joey at school as quiet, shy, and introverted most of the time. But with his friends, he's very talkative, loud, and extroverted. So all of a sudden then, the personal disposition that originally we're subscribing to, doesn't hold up, because only at school is he quiet. However, when he's with his friends, he's the life of the party. And this is one of the things we have to be careful of at times, is a lot of times we get so focusing on the personality, we don't look at the situation and say this is pervasive. If you remember back in the chapter on personality, one of the cautions we had is we said, yes, personality traits are relatively enduring ways of behavior. However, what we find now in, modern research is that necessarily they don't hold up across all situations. So we have to be careful when we start, ascribing why a person did something, and be careful, is it solely personality? Or are there social situations involved that may trigger the shyness or trigger Joey to be very outgoing? So that's one of the things we have to look at. Okay, let's take a look then. Let's just see how good you guys are in picking out introversion and extroversion. Okay, and from what you know, in the media and things like that, we're going to run 4 relatively well-known people up here in front of you, and I'm going to ask you to pick introversion or extroversion. So, Arnold Schwarzenegger, introverted or extroverted? the governor. He's actually quite an introverted individual. Now, you may be wondering, how did he run for office and go to all those barbecues, shake all those hands, kiss all those babies? When you're introverted, sometimes you do what you need to do. It doesn't mean that you can't come out. It just means you're probably going to burn a lot of energy doing it. Tom Cruise. Most of us have just seen him in the recent Mission Impossible movies. Okay? Introvert or extrovert? Movie actor? He too is also introverted. And that when he's not on the set, he'd prefer just to be with personal friends and his family. Britney Spears, rock star, bigger than life character. Is she introverted or extroverted? We get you on this one? Another introvert. Gets up there, does all those concerts, but, goes to maybe the Hollywood parties, but is that her cup of tea? No, actually she'd rather be with a small group of friends. Last one. Steve Jobs, founder of Apple Computers, recently passed away. Introvert or extrovert? Engineer by training. Did I get you? The priming effect gets you for 3 introverts in a row. You figure, heck, here comes a 4th. Steve Jobs was actually quite extroverted and enjoyed being around people, interacting, engaging people, and very open to new experience, which is one of the reasons why he is probably so creative. Okay. From there, what are the effects of attributions? And this is one of the areas, I guess, where we have to note that we have to be cautious about it. It's how we explain someone's behavior affects how we react to it. Okay, so here somebody swerves, cuts us off on the road. The situational attribution may be, maybe that driver is ill, or is it a dispositional attribution? That crazy driver. Okay. In a situational attribution, we're real tolerant and we may proceed cautiously and, give them a wide berth thinking, well, they're not feeling well and they're going to be erratic. In the other case over here, we have where it's dispositional, we move into that unfavorable reaction. We speed up, race past the other driver, craning to give a dirty look and probably, indicating to them, very prominently that we have arthritis in our middle digit. How many times do we see that behavior on the expressway? Okay. From there, then, let's shift a little bit and look at attitudes and actions. When we talk about an attitude, we're talking about a belief and a feeling that predisposes a person to respond in a particular way to objects, other people, and or events. Note that an attitude is a belief and a feeling, and that it predisposes, a real good reason for having predisposes on our line. We don't say that it does motivate a person to respond in a certain way, but that it predisposes to them, but not necessarily saying that is the way they're going to behave. Okay? If we believe a person is mean, we may feel a dislike for that person and act in an unfriendly manner towards them. And that is our predisposition. Okay, and then a lot of times we'll enter a new relationship having heard things about a person, and we'll come in with a certain predisposition to that, and sometimes we'll find out, gosh, they're anything like that, and God, I was glad that I wasn't, so indifferent to them and didn't take the time to get to know them. Okay, our attitudes predict behaviors imperfectly. Attitudes predict our behaviors imperfectly because other factors, including external situations and also influence, other external situations also influence our behavior. Okay? Think about, the President Bush, going to Congress and soliciting the input of Congress to approve moving into Iraq. We had nearly a unanimous vote. I think maybe only one individual didn't vote in favor of it. But afterwards, a lot of the Democratic leaders came out and said, "Oh, I wasn't for that." And it's kind of like, oh, well, you voted for it, but what they felt is that, gosh, the American public's looking for us to take action and to, be, real aggressive and going after the terrorists. And, here we believe that, they're in Iraq and that Iraq is, linked to this. And so, how can I not support it for fear of probably not being reelected? Okay. So, but anyways, however, they said, well, I had private reservations. Oh, okay. So anyways, actions can affect our attitudes as well. Not only do people stand for what they believe in, they start believing in what they stand for. So, sometimes if we can get a person to start espousing a particular belief and we can get them to do it over and over again, maybe where that belief originally they didn't have ownership in it, eventually they will. So, just kind of like in this picture here, cooperative actions can lead to mutual liking, such as, beliefs. Okay. During the Korean War, we were amazed at times how some of our American soldiers that were taken prisoner were as cooperative as they were with their captors. And that, of course, first off, it's like, well, you don't do that. You don't cooperate. You do everything you can to be disruptive. You do everything you can to escape. And what we came to find out in examining this behavior was that there was a little bit more to it, and it reflected basically a common social tendency. The Chinese were really good when they received a new American prisoner. Starting off by asking them to to run, little small errands or things like that, or small requests, to which most people would say, well, gee, yeah, I guess I can do that. That's not that big of a deal. Okay. And what they did then is they went from asking them to do small things to a little bit bigger, to a little bit bigger, to eventually bigger. And surprisingly, that when we gave in to the small one, it's kind of like, well, I already agreed to do something. I wasn't going to do anything for him, but I already agreed, okay, I'll do this. And then it got bigger and bigger, and it's like a little snowball rolling downhill, is that, all of a sudden we were complying with bigger and bigger requests. Okay. This is what was known today as the foot in the door phenomenon. And it's a tendency for people who have first agreed to a small request to comply later with a larger request. And today in professional sales programs, we're out there teaching salespeople how to do this. As you're out on the new car lot and he's showing you around, because rather than ask you, do you want to buy the car, which is a big request, is maybe just something simple as, and maybe as innocuous, hey, would you like to come in and have a cup of coffee and we can talk about the car and the features and the price. And all of a sudden you said yes, but if you said, would you like to come in and sit down and fill out the paperwork, well, that may be just too much and we won't do it. But by initiating a small request, we're more likely then to be able to build up to getting you to say yes to a larger request. And once again, we refer to this as the foot in the door phenomenon. Okay. What would be good to do here is to pause the video and go over to the slide set and watch the watch the video here by clicking on the picture for slide 20 and see the actual prison study being conducted, as well as interviews with individuals that were involved in it. The Zimbardo prison study was a study that looked at conformity. And what Zimbardo did is he came up with this notion of taking graduate students and a few graduate professors and putting them into a mock prison setting. He actually created down in the basement of the psychology building at Stanford kind of a mock jail situation in a rather large room in the basement, set up, cells and things like that, assign people to prisoner roles and people as guards. Zimbardo himself was the prison warden. And within a matter of days, this thing got totally out of hand, much more so than Zimbardo actually felt. Philip, in his role as warden, he was just as bad as everybody else. He knew it was an experiment, knew it wasn't real, and got so caught up in it that he didn't realize the severity. But the guards were treating the other graduate students like they were prisoners. The prisoners were responding hostilely to the guards and everything else, and they had to stop this thing before somebody got seriously hurt, physically, if not psychologically. And so, but it was really amazing. Today we use parallels from the Zimbardo study over to Abu Ghraib. Some of you may remember it was a prison in Iraq that was run by U.S. soldiers for Iraqi prisoners that we caught, a lot of the Red Guard and things like that, and people that we thought maybe be potential terrorists were put there. Our prison guards were not professional guards. They were just regular GIs that were put in charge of a prison, so they didn't go through any special training to avoid what Zimbardo actually found here. But things got really out of hand, and our guards were very harshly treating the prisoners. They were responding likewise, and it really got to be a mess. And Zimbardo's study shows how good people can do evil things when they get caught up in this kind of role-playing of these various parts, is that we lose touch with reality. Okay. Another aspect that we look at here when we take a look at attitudes is what happens when you have an attitude and you act directly almost opposite to that particular attitude. This is what we refer to as cognitive dissonance. And the cognition is your attitude. It's your thought that you have. And the dissonance is that our behavior is incongruent with it, and that behavior causes us stress. Fessinger, who studied this principle back in 1957, said, to relieve ourselves of this tension, we bring our attitudes closer to our actions. Okay? Or what we can do is essentially try to justify or rationalize our behavior. So in cognitive dissonance, we act to reduce discomfort, which is dissonance, that we feel when two of our thoughts, our cognitions, are inconsistent. Or it could be a cognition and an action. And thus we work to reduce the dissonance by changing our attitudes. An example here, which kind of close to home probably for most college students, as tuition keeps going up from year to year, as our young lady up here is reflecting the notion that tuition here is too high. However, she may find herself also saying, well, boy, the school needs more money for this and the school needs more money for that. Now, wait a second. I got one attitude that tuition is too high. And then on the other side, I'm thinking that the school needs more money for various things. Okay, we need more teachers. Well, how do you get more teachers? You need more money. So thus we have cognitive dissonance arrive between two competing attitudes. And the awareness that the attitude and behavior are consistent here, what she does is she works to resolve it. And therefore her resolution may be, well, maybe the school has a point. Well, the thing is too, is that let's say that, in the first situation, I'm working at a place and I'm thinking, gosh, God, I really don't enjoy working here. This is not a good place to work. However, week after week after week, I return to that place of work. And then, 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road, of having this feeling that, hey, this isn't a good place. But then, why in the heck am I still here producing great dissonance? Over time, what I may do is very likely modify my original attitude to say, well, this really isn't such a bad place. So-and-so works over there and look at what they're going through, and so-and-so's over there. And, hey, it's a good job. It's got good job security. I've seen other friends maybe in better jobs, but they've lost their jobs. This isn't such a bad place to be. And this is this principle of cognitive dissonance, where if we have two different attitudes, or we have an attitude and an action that are incongruent, that will work to resolve those is to basically resolve the dissidence or discomfort that we feel. And we as humans basically are hedonistic. Sigmund Freud, identified that, way back. And that's one of the things he was probably right on, is that we do seek to be in a pleasurable state. And so dissidence or discomfort, we're going to want to resolve it. Okay. And that brings us to the end of part 1, and we'll come back in part 2 and talk about social influence.